Morning, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes while everybody jumps on to the session. So just hang tight, and we'll be getting started quite shortly. Hey, everyone, welcome. We're just going to wait another minute or two for people to jump onto the session. So apologies, you'll hear me say this a couple more times as more people jump on. But yeah, we'll be getting started around 11:03 or thereabouts. Hey guys, if you're just jumping on, we'll just be another minute or so. I'm just waiting for a few more people to jump on. And then we will be kicking off with the webinar, How to Lead a Design Team, with Matt Tsourdalakis, whose name I may have pronounced correctly, but possibly not.
Yeah, pretty close, mate. There's a few different levels of difficulty. So you were probably on the easy side of pronunciation there, and then the slightly harder is when you introduce the TS. So it's Tsourdalakis.
Oh.
And then the real hard way is the full Greekos way is Tsourdalakis.
Yeah, I think I've achieved like white boy success. Is kind of where I got to there.
Yeah.
All right, I think we'll probably just get kicked off. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Eric. Before we jump into the session, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're virtually gathered today, and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So before we introduce our speaker for the day, whose name is Matt, we'll just stick with Matt. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about Academy XI, the company that I work for, and Matt works with as well, and what we do and why this subject about design leadership is important to us. So if you don't know anything about us, we teach, we're a school for design, digital, and data. So we have courses running for individuals online and usually in person, not for the last 6 months. And then we run team training inside corporates and government bodies as well. So I head up the team training side of the business, but broadly, yeah, it's emerging disciplines, very job role focused, on the job skills and helping people land roles in design and digital. One thing that we see a lot of in digital and design, but really in digital or in design heavily, is that unsurprisingly, when people get into these professions, they do it because they want to design things and they want to build stuff, they want to create, and that's what's important to them. It's what they're passionate about, as it should be. But unlike quite a lot of other spaces, other industries, verticals, etc., there isn't, I would say, we don't see a lot of people going into design with the intention of becoming leaders, which is a huge change from your traditional roles like accounting, like finance, marketing, where certain people are going in with the intention of becoming leaders, managers. It's a career path in itself, is management. And if you get into that sort of trajectory, you're being groomed almost from day one, in some cases, like coming out of graduate programs, to become a leader and a manager in the future. And that sort of just, for better or for worse, has not really been a thing in design and in digital as well. And then what you see is a lot is you get situations where some exec will come to you as the practicing, a practitioner, design practitioner, and say, "Hey, guess what? Good news, you're the manager now. Aren't you happy?" And you go, "Well, I guess so, but I've never really even really given this much thought before, and I've certainly not been trained in how to lead teams." And then they'll go something like, "Oh, well, you're the best designer we've got, so obviously you're the best choice." And you go, "Well, great, thanks for your faith in me, but can I get some training or something like that?" And they'll go, "No, no, you're good," and off you go. And I think a lot of the time, part of the reason for that is that execs don't understand design, they don't understand digital, and it's easier for them to just sort of leave it up to you than to actually deep dive into that world. And so you end up with this situation where it's nice that you're now a design leader, but how do you actually operationalize that on a day-to-day basis, and how do you progress yourself too? So it's a topic that's really important to us as a company, and to me, I'm quite passionate about it. But here today, we have one who is both more passionate about it and knows a hell of a lot more about it than me as well. So I'm about to introduce Matt. Before I do, just a few housekeeping items. On the bottom of your screen, you will see what to all of you should be very familiar territory, I would imagine by now, the chat function, and then maybe a little bit less so the Q&A. So I see people firing stuff into the chat now. That's great. If you want to put your name, what you do, where you're coming from, your company, anything like that in there, feel free. Bit of interactivity never hurts. And then in the Q&A, if you have questions for probably Matt or myself as we roll through the content, put them in there. And then the last 15 minutes of the session, we try and do 15, it usually ends up being about 10, we'll see how it goes, is devoted to responding to those questions. So you can do it now, or as you go through, and we'll come back to them, or you can put them in at the end, and we'll respond to those at the end. So that's kind of the broad framework. What I'm now going to do is introduce Matt, and he's got a presentation for you, going to take you through sort of some of the tips, tricks, tools that he has put together over a career as a design leader. So Matt, over to you.
Cool. Thanks very much, Eric. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to everyone who's joined. Really excited to share some of this with you. So I might start sharing my screen. I'll share my computer sound as well. Okay, cool. So you should be seeing the ocean right now, and now you should be seeing the first intro screen.
We do.
Cool. Yay. Awesome. All right. It's working. All right, let's kick it off then. So when I was first starting out as a designer, I was often working within like small teams of like 1 or 2, and it meant that I was like having to wear multiple hats per day. I never really got to experience what it was like to be like in a big team. And then sort of like midway through my career, I got the opportunity to work within a UX team at a global agency. And my eyes were really open to see what could be achieved when a group of experts all work together towards a common goal. And ever since then, I've become obsessed with learning about how successful teams operate. Because ultimately, if we're not building successful teams, we won't be building successful products or outcomes for users. And it can be easy to look at a team's successes and overlook the foundational things that help them get there. And what I found is that if you and your team can't do the basics well, then you're going to struggle to achieve any consistent long-term success. So I'm going to share some of the foundational things, or I call them like 1%ers, to help a design team become more time efficient, more cost effective, more successful, and happier. And just a little disclaimer as well. So this isn't just information for people who are already in a design leadership position. Not everyone is going to end up leading a team in their career, but you can all be a catalyst of positive change in your work environment. And we really need like every designer, whether you're the most junior designer to the most senior, to basically embrace the idea that you are a leader, even if you're just a leader over yourself and your own design practice. And for me personally, one of my career goals is to develop leadership skills in people that I work with. And I'd love to see the design industry champion good leadership and teamwork. So that's just a little bit of background about me and about this talk. So let's begin with some awesome doggo teamwork. I'm not sure if you guys can see that little GIF there, but that's pretty good teamwork with that dog. I don't know how they trained those dogs to do that, but it's just really cool. So first point, understanding the lay of the land. So when you enter into a design team, or if you're already embedded into a design team, you really need to understand everything about the environment in which your team is operating. So some of the things, like it's like an assessment or an audit that you kind of do at the start if you wanted to sort of work out how to improve your design team. You need to look at what you're dealing with. So there's kind of like 3 key things that I would say you need to like really assess. One of them would be like any legacy systems, so old, outdated software, hardware, methodologies, or processes. You also need to be looking at like what kind of red tape do you have to deal with? Like, are you working within a business that has like tons of regulations and just heaps of red tape you have to cut through? Because that's obviously going to impact how effective you can run as a team. And then the other one I would say is really important to assess what's the resistance to change like. I mean, are there attitudes that follow the, this is the way we've always done it kind of mantra? Like, I mean, it's a catch-22 because colleagues can complain about their current situation, but then resist suggestions for change in the same breath. And you need to kind of suss that out, like how resistant are people to change within your design team, but also within the wider business in which you work. So as a leader in your workplace, you should attempt to understand, and when I say leader in your workplace, again, not just the design lead, just yourself being a designer, you have leadership capabilities. You should be attempting to understand what's the general attitude from those on the floor doing the work. So your colleagues, your bosses, everyone around you, what's the attitude? Are like people, are they happy? Are they frustrated? Are they disinterested in their work? What's the most significant pain points or blockers to productivity? So what's stopping people from doing their best work in the team? And also, who are the gatekeepers? Who's the most influential people in the business? I call them gatekeepers. So it's like, who do you have to kind of like suck up to a degree to get something changed for the better? And it's really important to make sure that you're focusing on that as well, because otherwise nothing's going to change. There's a really good quote from Simon Sinek. Says, "The true price of leadership is the willingness to place the needs of others above your own. Great leaders truly care about those they are privileged to lead and understand that the true cost of leadership privilege comes at the expense of self-interest." So it's an overall attitude that focuses on the needs of the team and the broader business, not your own. That's one of the first things I would suggest that you do to start really building more solid foundations in your team. The next thing I would say is rapid and inclusive decision making. So you need to have a way to come up with decisions in a rapid and inclusive way. So UX teams can often have a range of problems that can stifle productivity and creativity. And as a leader, you can attempt to start diagnosing problems and solutions. Like if you're a design leader or a manager, you can just start going, oh yeah, well, we're going to change this and change that. Or if you're just an outspoken person, you can say, well, yeah, we should just change all these different things. But that's a surefire way to lose trust within your team, because it needs to be a more inclusive process. So when making decisions around problems you're trying to solve, you need to be quick, collaborative, and focused. And often we're good at like running workshops for like clients and other departments, but sometimes we can neglect our own design teams and like, how do we have a quick workshop that we can actually make a decision that's inclusive and gets everyone on board and is the best thing for the overall team? So what I'm going to show you is, many of you will probably be familiar with AJ and Smart. If you're not, check them out. They run like lots of workshops, but they have this one particular workshop called a lightning decision jam. I'm going to run through it super quick because the information is all there, but basically you need to have something that you can implement in your team if you're like, hey, we really need to make a decision and it's going to be a very impactful decision. We need to have something that we can run really, really quickly. So I'll run through it again super quick. The overall crux of this methodology is lightning decision jams, the workshop techniques to solve any problem with any amount of people with minimal discussion and all under 2 hours, which that's music to my ears, because when someone says we're going to do like an all-day workshop, I'm just like, oh God, I can't stand all-day workshops. The quicker they are and the quicker you can get to some quality outputs and decisions, the better. So it follows a simple 4-step process where you note, stick, vote, and prioritize. And everyone, I'm sure, will be familiar with at least some of these techniques, but I'll just run through it really quickly anyway. So step 1, you note alone. Everyone has the opportunity to get their ideas down without distraction or persuasion. This is also really important if you've got like some really outspoken designers in a team and some really quiet introverted designers. You don't want like the outspoken ones to just like dominate conversation. So the first thing you're doing is you're writing down any ideas to solve the problem alone in silence. You're just writing them down. All ideas are worth considering no matter how out there. And it's also anonymous, so no one needs to feel embarrassed about putting a silly idea. The next thing you do is you stick them up. So everyone sticks up their ideas, and then the facilitator will then quickly group and categorize each idea. If there's some duplicates, they just sort of merge them together. Then step 3, everyone has the same amount of dots to vote on their favorite idea. And again, this is done alone and in silence, so you haven't got someone like just spruiking their idea. And then the facilitator picks the top 3 or 4 winning ideas and moves to the next step, which is the prioritization. So prioritize the winning ideas using impact and effort scale. And this is where you start to have a bit more discussion. So this is where the facilitator would sort of move it along. I mean, I'm sure everyone's done this before with impact and effort, but this is where you'll sort of discuss and say, does everyone agree that this is a high impact and low effort solution? And that's where you'll get a bit of that dialogue. After you identify the low hanging fruit, which is that high impact and low effort, you then turn it into actionable tasks, and then you assign to your team with a due date. So you'll say, okay, this is something we're going to trial. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to circle back, catch up again, and see how we've gone with these particular action items to work towards this particular solution. So this is something that I've used before. As I said, I think it's really great. And you can check out like a really extensive video on AJ and Smart that talks about it. But you just need to have something ready to go that everyone's familiar with in terms of how you can make decisions, like important decisions, really rapidly. Next one, finding the right tools. Now, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to the latest design, collaboration, and productivity tools. And the reason I'm so into it is because I've learned that great things can be achieved with the right tools. And I came across this quote from this guy. I don't know who he is, but I have to credit him. His name is Jeff. He said, a good tool improves the way you work. A great tool improves the way you think. And I just thought that's a fantastic quote. And I really experienced this for myself where, you know, you may have been using a particular tool for ages, like say Photoshop, and then you switch to a better tool like Sketch or Figma, and you're just like, whoa, I can't believe I've been using Photoshop to design websites. It was just stupid that I ever considered doing that. And these tools are so much better. So it means that you can spend less time trying to get the tool to work and more time trying to get your ideas to work. And that's just like, that's the sweet spot where you're just like, as you're thinking and you're coming up with the ideas, the work is just happening with using that particular tool. So how do you pick the right tools for your team? Okay, so it's not just whatever's the most popular or the tool that you've just used before. That can be a tendency, and like a lot of the, I'm baffled that a lot of those business decisions are, oh well, everyone else is using Sketch or everyone else is using Figma, so we just use that. So to choose the right tools, you need to weigh up the potential gains versus the potential losses. So say you come into a team and they're using Sketch and you're like, hey, Figma is like so much better than Sketch, you know, because of this, and that. all these other reasons. You need to really make sure that you understand, well, has the team and the business just invested in training for Sketch and in building all the design systems in Sketch and becoming a Sketch certified affiliate or something like that? You have to really consider all of these things, and that should inform your decision, not just that this particular tool is superior. But what I'd say as a tip is don't shelve a new tool forever. Like if say you go, look, Figma is probably a better tool, but not for right now. Maybe we should review it in a couple of years' time or in 6 months' time, because circumstances can change and the particular pain points associated with a particular tool could start to basically mean that that tool is no longer effective for your team. So just constantly review it, constantly ask your team, are you finding these tools like really painful to use? Is the business finding it? Ask the wider business, do you like it that we're trying to collaborate with you guys in Sketch versus something like Figma, which we can just send you links, all that sort of stuff. So make sure you provide an open forum for everyone in the design team to share the tools that they are using and also how they use them. So the way that I've done this before is like when you have a catch up in your team, just be like, hey, does anyone have, like every week, hey, does anyone have any new tools that they're using, or has anyone discovered a new feature? Because I mean, we know that these design tools are always coming out with new features. And it's amazing what you can learn from just how other people are using a particular tool. You're like, I didn't even know that you could do that particular thing in Figma or Sketch or Miro or whatever you're using. So make sure that you have that open forum. And yes, make sure that you're always reviewing your tools. It's a constant thing. Okay, next one, provide a better feedback process. So this one got a bit of a story here. So there was a time where I walked out of a feedback session. This is with like a large a retailer that I was working for. There was a feedback session with key stakeholders, and at the end of this, it was like an hour-long feedback session. One of my designers came up to me and they were just like looking really, really confused. And I was like, what's up? And they're like, so what do I actually do off the back of that feedback session? I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, I've done all this work, and then that stakeholder said they wanted this particular thing done, and then another stakeholder said this, and then you said this as well. So I've got conflicting things. So I just like, do I just throw out all the work I did and start from scratch, or what do I do? And at that point in time, I realized that, feedback sessions are supposed to provide constructive feedback to help the team do better work and stay aligned to common goals. But what I've noticed is that feedback sessions are often usually ambiguous and based on a whole lot of gut feel. And when you walk out of a feedback session and you feel more confused than before you went into that feedback session, that's really going to like kill the morale in your team, and it's just going to be not a good place to be. So off the back of that, I developed this structure. It's an acronym, CID. It's basically just something that I implemented in that team, and I wouldn't hesitate to implement this in other teams. And you can certainly do your own, feedback process. But basically, it means that there's a clear process that every designer comes prepared with, and also the stakeholders can see ahead of time and be prepared for what they're going to see. So CID, the C stands for context, okay? So often I see it break down where a designer gets into a feedback session and they just start showing their work and talking about why these colors and why those images or why this whatever. And what happens is the stakeholders get fixated on the most random wrong things. And we can sometimes be like, well, why are they just so focused on the color when these are clearly wireframes, low fidelity wireframes. Why are they asking why it's gray and not blue? The reason for that is no one knows as much about your project or your design or the thing that you're working on as you. So you need to really provide that context to another stakeholder who wouldn't have a clue that you've only spent 1 or 2 hours on this particular piece of work, and you're only asking for feedback on the concept, not on the final design. So it's really, really important to start and give as much context as possible. The next thing you need to come armed with, which being UX designers, CX designers, service designers, we have to come with some degree of insights. So anything you've uncovered as a UXer, so research, competitor analysis, data, whatever you can come with, make sure that you really bring that into the conversation before you show your design or talk about what you've put together, because you want it to be based on science and fact. You don't want it to be like based on your gut feel or even, well, I'm the designer and I'm more of an expert than you. That's not what, well, obviously that's not what UXers try and aspire to. We obviously need to have as much insight as possible. You're not always going to have a heap of insights, especially like early in a project. You might not have had, you know, lots of user research that you've conducted or insights there, but come with what you can and present that. And this is really going to help guide and possibly shut down a stakeholder's dumb idea. So if, you know, particular insights say that customers really want this particular approach, if the stakeholder in the room wanted to go on a completely different approach, they're going to look kind of silly going, no, I think we should change all of that when you're coming armed with that particular insight. They can still do it, but they're just going to look kind of silly saying, oh, I think we should do it this way. And then you obviously go into your design. So once you've done context, insights, then you start saying, and this is what I've actually put together. And you present what you've designed. You include, you know, your annotations on your design work to help you stay on track, jog your memory. And yeah, and I always suggest to designers not to go obviously too hi-fi too soon, because it may distract from the overall concept or mean that you had you know, time to only work on one idea when you could have, you know, presented 3 or 4 different ideas. So that's the basic framework there. And then the last step, and this is probably, you know, equally as important, is tying up any loose ends. So you don't want to just like give the context, insights, show your design, and then just sit down and then go, wait a minute, what did we decide? So you need to make sure that you or someone else in the room is taking down notes throughout the feedback session. And you need to confirm any action items, decisions, or questions before you move on to the next agenda item. So once the session is done, then you send all of the notes with all the action items, decisions. You send all of that information to everyone that was in that meeting. And then everyone can see it, everyone can review it. And then if in 2 weeks' time, the general manager says, hey, why did we do that particular thing? I didn't agree to that. You can bring up the notes and say, hey, yeah, in the session that you were in, we all talked about blah, and this is what we decided. Here's the minutes. It was sent to you 2 weeks ago. And then they'll have to eat some humble pie. So I believe if you apply a framework like this, obviously you can make it your own, but if you have some kind of framework like this, the UX team will be better prepared, stakeholders will be more helpful in their feedback, and any ambiguity should mostly stop. And that's always a win-win-win situation, and witnessing a new process improve a situation is always cause for celebration. So after I implemented this at that retailer that I was working for, we found that, yeah, things did improve drastically, and designers and stakeholders walked out of that feedback session with a clear understanding of exactly what we're going to do and how we're going to proceed. Moving on to the next one, one-on-one catch-ups. When I was a junior designer, I often craved time with my manager so I could chat about my work, my career ambitions, and anything else that was bothering me. Having a manager who takes the time to talk makes you feel valued. It can prevent negative feelings from being bottled up and festering below the surface. So I believe as design leaders, we can do better to make sure that the team's individual needs are always priority number one. And the best way that I've seen this to approach this is via regular one-on-one catch-ups. Now, some designers, depending on whether you're junior or senior or wherever you are in your career, some prefer weekly catch-ups, some prefer fortnightly, and some prefer monthly. it's up to each team member to choose the frequency, and it should be that dialogue and discussion. But the most important thing is it should be regular. It should be set in your calendars that, hey, once a month on this particular day, we're going to catch up and we're going to talk. So more important, building on top of that is, yes, you obviously got to schedule it in, but you need to have a simple and flexible structure that you can both follow to make sure that it's a productive catch-up. So this is a structure that I've used. I've trialed many different formats. If you even Google, how to run your one-on-one catch-ups with the team, there's heaps and heaps of resources out there that talk about different questions. This is what I've come up with, and I've really tried to condense it, and it's been successful for me. So you can sort of pick and choose what you think. But I think the first thing that I ask in every single catch-up is, how's everything going? I know this seems kind of like, duh, why wouldn't you ask that? But I've had catch-ups with managers where they don't even ask that question. They just go straight into, questions about performance or projects or something else. And it's like, you just kind of going to make sure that you show your team that you care. And also you want to just let your team member talk about whatever they want to talk about. Maybe they're going to talk about the project that they're struggling on, or maybe they're going to talk about the fact that they're stressing out about coronavirus or elections or whatever it is. Just let them vent and listen. And that's a really good way to sort of build a bond with your team member. The next thing that I ask is, are you experiencing any pain points or blockers that I can assist with? So usually, if there's something that they've been struggling with, that they might have touched on it in the first question, but then you need to be really intentional to ask, is there anything that I can help you with? And again, that shows that you being a servant leader, you're there to help them and help them arrive at a solution. And this is again really good for building that trust and making sure that you're working collaboratively on solutions. So it should be, again, a discussion, not just you dictating to them what needs to be changed. Question number 3, what would you like to achieve during your time at insert company here and beyond? This is super important. And again, something that I don't understand why this doesn't get asked more often, but you need to be asking them, like, what do you want to achieve at this business? What do you want to achieve into the future? So it's like, what's your short-term goals? What's your long-term goals? And you need to be asking this regularly because their situations might change. Like maybe at the last catch up, they were just like, I just really want to work my way up into the ranks and I want to get into, design leadership and all that sort of stuff. And you're like, great. What can we do to enable you to work towards that? But then the next catch up, they might go, hey, the most important thing for me now is a solid income and a pay rise because we're saving up for a house. You just got to ask these questions and show them that you're really interested in helping them achieve their short-term goals and their long-term goals. And number 4, is there anything more or less you'd like from me? So this is kind of that roundabout way of saying, asking them for feedback. Are you happy with how I'm leading you? Is there anything more or less you'd like from me? And just really leave it to them to sort of, talk about anything that they would like to see you do in a leader, how you approach them. And good leaders are adaptable. They don't just go, well, I'm just this kind of leader and that's how I lead all of my team. Different individuals have different specific needs in their manager or leader. So just make sure that you ask that question as well. And the last step, again, action items. So you need to make sure that as you're going through these questions, you're jotting down anything that is an action item, either for you as the leader or for them. And then next time when you catch up, you look back on your last catch up action items and go, how are we going with that? Did we actually achieve what we set out to achieve from last time? So I found this really, really works well. As you can see, it's only 5 questions. You can easily run this in a half-hour session. And the response from people that I've led using this has been really good. Gary V, here he is. he sums it up pretty well. I've just got like a short snippet, and I'll just play it, and you can just hear what he has to say.
But if you were managing people and you've not had
Hopefully
a sit down with one of your employees in the last 6 months or a year to find out what they care about today, whether that's money, work-life balance, title, fame, and more importantly, if you have an employee that is actually seriously important to your business, which, oh, by the way, means if you have one employee and they're the only employee you have and it's you and them, and you do not have an understanding of what drives them, you need to have a 2.5-hour dinner and create that glue. Because one of the biggest things I see in businesses and entrepreneurs in failing is the over-reliance on an employee that leaves and then they have to start all over for 18 months or are completely crippled by it. And the thing that could have allowed them to mitigate that disaster is literally a conversation.
Yeah, so one-on-ones involve a big investment of time. And that's often why they get neglected, because the manager's like, I'm just too busy. But from my experience, it's well worth it. It's the most foundational way of building trust between a manager and their team. So if you're going to neglect something, I would say don't neglect one-on-one catch-ups. It's super important. Okay, next one, collecting anonymous feedback. Now you got one-on-one catch-ups. They'll often uncover several recurring trends across the wider team, but it can be a challenge to document and present this information to your direct report. So say if like you're catching up with everyone and everyone's got like the same issue, it can be really difficult to do that because maybe it's confidential what you're sharing as one-on-one. So there needs to be also an anonymous feedback collection in place. So this is something that I've used before. There's, again, lots of other tools. I don't get sponsored by Office Vibe or anything like that. But this particular tool, Office Vibe, automatically sends NPS-style surveys to your team. It shows you where your team is lacking, and you can also use it to set up and document your one-on-ones if you want to as well. And that you can set up like a free account and still get quite a good amount of access. So I'll just show you very quickly. This is like a report card that you get. I'll just zoom in on that. So basically, based on those questions that your team is being asked on a weekly basis, you get this scorecard. And it might be a little bit blurry for you guys, but basically you can see that areas that you're doing well in, and you can see areas where you can have the biggest impact that you can improve on. So in this particular scorecard, which is one that I used, in a recent position that I was in, recognition, alignment, and wellness were 3 things that were scoring quite low. So we were able to, in our weekly catch-ups, we were able to say, hey, we're not scoring very well in these areas. How can we improve? And the other thing is, this is so it's anonymous feedback. There's no names associated to this. So hopefully you're getting an honest response. But the other thing is it's transparent. So this was shared as a live link with my team at all times, so people could check in and see how we're going. And weekly, we would run over it as a team. So it's not like I want your feedback, but then I'm going to just keep it in a box and keep it to myself. And that can be, a bit of a tendency, especially if, say, relationship with manager, if that's scoring very lowly across the board, the tendency could be, oh, I don't want to talk about that. But we're just going to get over ourselves a little bit and be like, if we're not doing well in a number of areas, we have to address it. We have to be honest about it. That's the only way that we're going to improve. So I would strongly recommend this. It's super easy, doesn't take time or a lot of money or resources, but something like this is going to be super valuable so you can focus your energy on areas that you might not even know that it's actually a problem. So I definitely would recommend some sort of anonymous feedback system. Maintaining visibility of work. So this is a really important one. And just the other day, I was chatting with a designer who's working at a very large corporate, and she's having trouble communicating that her workload was crippling her productivity. So she's kind of like working for 2 separate teams. So they're like feeding separate requests to her via Teams and Outlook. And she just was like, well, how do I push back and say no to them? Because they don't know that I'm doing work for the other team as well. And she was just under this weight of pressure, also feeling inadequate, having to work overtime. and it just was not a great situation to be in. So as a lead, you don't want to be left guessing who's doing what in your team, and you don't want your team guessing what they should be working on, where their priorities are. So I strongly recommend having some kind of open visibility of work system. You could do it in Trello. I've used this particular one called Forecast. Again, I don't get paid by them, but I've just found that it's been really good. It's one of the tools that like a traffic manager would use, but you could use it within your team. It doesn't have to be just for like a traffic manager. And I'll show you how it works from a visibility perspective. So this is an actual example. I'll just zoom in on that a little bit. So basically, all it does is it schedules in how many work hours per week you have. So you like set that up, say 40 hours a week. And then each particular designer in your team, including you as the lead, you start filling out blocks of time, and it's based on estimates. It's based on like your Outlook history. You can sort of look and see, and it might be a little bit blurry for you guys there, but as an example, when I was the UX lead in this particular place, emails, meetings, conversations, and UX review was taking up on average 4.5 hours of my day every day. So what I did was I blocked that in there, and it meant that time, that's legitimately the time that I was spending on doing that particular thing. And then it means that I only have a very small amount of time to do everything else. So the reason why that's really important is you'll sometimes encounter a situation where your superior or a much more senior stakeholder will say, why aren't you guys being efficient? And if you don't have something mathematical that you can show them, something scientific, mathematical, some like actual hard evidence to show them where your time is being spent, it's a really hard conversation to have. And often you'll just be under the pump and you just go, oh, I don't know. And then you just end up working overtime, which is just really, really bad. So having something like this means if my manager said to me, hey, we need you to work on this particular project. And I'll be like, okay, cool. Well, how many hours do we estimate that's going to take? And if they said, oh, look, it's going to be an additional 10 hours per week, well, then I'd be able to open this up and say, hey, just letting you know, I'm spending 4.5 hours a day on emails, meetings, conversations, and UX review. Something's got to give here. So are you happy for me to decline more meetings? Are you happy for me to be less involved in UX review? That's the kind of conversation that helps you arrive at a positive outcome, because your manager or a senior stakeholder, they can't argue with the numbers unless they deny that you're actually spending that amount of time on a project. But once they look at this, they can go, okay, well, let's remove some of these items and let's move things around. And the other great thing about it is, I'm not sure if you can see, so we've got a few other designers here. If one particular designer is over capacity, you can look at and see who else in your team has some capacity, and then you can just shuffle things around. So this is really important. It also gives, a few weeks in advance, so a designer can come in on a Monday morning and go, okay, for the next 2 weeks, I'm blocked out working on these things. So I have a bit of, foresight to see exactly what I'm going to be working on. So something like this is really, really good. And I strongly recommend you can set this up probably in Trello or something else like that. But having that visibility of work is a really, really valuable thing in your team. So wrapping it up, good teams have solid foundations. And I think, a lot of this stuff, as you can see, I didn't talk about talent. I didn't talk about, having an amazing product or anything like that. It's just about the foundational things that often get neglected because we're just so focused on the urgent things that we need to get done. So I'd say pay close attention to how your team's feeling and performing. Ask people how they're going. If someone's looks like they're really stressed and having a rough day, just ask them, are you okay? Is there anything I can help you with? Focus on the continuous team improvement. So always be thinking about how can we do things better? Make sure you're using the best tools, as I said earlier on. Focus more on the 1%ers, so doing the basics well and less on fighting urgent fires, like when you're, a senior stakeholder says, hey, we just need to get all of this stuff done because this is super urgent. yes, urgent things are always going to come through, but we might need to make sure we're not neglecting the most important things, which is the ongoing team foundations. So I would say, as a final sort of word, take initiative, take charge, embrace the challenge of laying aside your selfish desires to lay the foundations that will leave a legacy. And in the famous words of Rob Schneider, you can do it.
Come on, do the voice. Do the voice.
You can do it. Yeah, you can do it.
You.
Anyway. And also, I just want to say, so I've got this entire talk as a Medium article published on UX Collective. So I'm sure we can provide a link either in the chat or even the follow-up email that'll come out with the link to the talk. So you'll be able to go there and get a little bit more detail on any of these. So don't worry if you weren't taking notes. It all does live in this Medium article. So apart from that, thank you.
Thanks, Matt. That was really good for all of you out there who either are leaders or sort of on the path to becoming. I think those are really good actionable tips that you can take away. We've got a few questions in the Q&A that I will get to very shortly. If you guys have any others, we've got almost 15 minutes for questions. So super keen for this to become as interactive of a session as a webinar format can be. So feel free to fire those in. I just had a few sort of comments I thought I'd make quickly on some of the content that I've seen in my career, because I've spent most of my career actually in creative digital software dev agencies. So a big one with the when you go in to get into a feedback session, particularly with a client or an internal stakeholder, what I see really works well is what you're really doing there is you're doing, like, we have a course on data-driven storytelling. And that's almost what you're doing in that 3-step process where you're, with the context, you're kind of saying, like, here's the problem we're trying to solve. And then with the insights, you're saying, like, so, and here's really, like, when we dug into this, here's some of the interesting facts we pulled out. And then with the design, this is how we're trying to solve that problem. And then if we do this, and the reason I built it this way is because it's going to deliver this outcome that's going to solve this problem. And if you can kind of tell that linear story of, like, problem through insight, through design, and then into the solution, it becomes really, really hard for that person, one, to argue with that logic. And also they'll hopefully go, like, wow, you're awesome. Like, you're going to make me look like a champion. We're solving some concrete problems, particularly because that's just how, like, execs think. They want to see the problem solved. And I mean, for obvious reasons, and it will make them less likely to bog down in they want to have opinions. It's just kind of just the nature of it. And so they'll turn that blue or turn that green. And as soon as you go into the bigger picture stuff that they should be solving, then that's what they focus on. And you can take it away from the design elements that leaves you free to do you know it better than they do. So that was one. And then just another one in creative agencies I've often seen, and also often not seen the visibility tool used. One thing that I found it really good for was that as a leader, you can then look back on your team and you can see, like, okay, so Jenny's kind of been working on a boring project for the last few weeks. She's been slogging the way in the trenches, doing something, it's not as creative as it might be. Let's give her a fun project now. And then you can kind of break it up and you can sort of bring fun times parity, which is a weird word that I just invented, but to your team. So it's not like, because it can be really damaging when someone's like, oh, so-and-so gets all the cool stuff and I get to work in the trenches all the time, and you don't want that. So those are just a few thoughts from me. Now we've got quite a few more questions in here, so let's get amongst it. A good one that's been sitting in here for a bit, is just really good, I think, is so from anonymous attendee. There are 2 different types of design leads in my company. So I guess this is like 2 groups of different types, I assume. One is the type that oversees the process and comments on the work from the contributors. And then the other is on the tools, getting their hands dirty and working together with their team. Curious to know, which one do you think is better? Is there a right way or is there a wrong way? Thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Look, personally, I don't think there's a definite right or wrong answer. It really does depend on the organization, the structure, also how many people within the team. Probably wouldn't make sense to have, if you've got only a team of sort of 3 or 4 designers, to have one design leader who is focusing on operational side of things and another one who's kind of more in the trenches and on the tools. Personally, I prefer to be a design lead who is a bit of both. And the reason for that is, if you're all about operations, design operations and just like managing, workloads and things like that, when your team starts to struggle with issues, say like, oh, we're really struggling with Figma, the prototyping is not adequate for this particular project. If you're just all on operations, you kind of can lose a bit of touch with what it's like to be on the tools. And let's face it, you're leading people who are in some way on the tools, even like researchers, who are, conducting research and doing interviews and things like that. I think the best kind of design leads are ones that do step in from time to time and jump in on usability testing, or jump in on a bit of help with prototyping, or a little bit of the design stuff in Figma. Just getting their hands dirty, because then I guess it helps you to empathize more with the team when they're coming with those struggles. That's just my take. That's what I prefer. I know that not every UX lead would be that way inclined, and also, as I said, not every business likes to have someone who's doing a bit of everything. It does require a bit more juggling. It requires someone who has both good operational and management skills and good design skills, which is unfortunately not something that is always super, super common. But I think if we work towards developing both, like being really good at management and also good at design as well, I think that's a real winning combination.
Yeah, and I think there's always a danger if you're completely off the tools of your team seeing that and it kind of alienating you to them when they're like, oh, this guy, he's not even a designer anymore. Like there's the potential for that to creep in. Yeah. And then also, if say you decide to maybe take a dream job for the company you've always wanted to work for, and you're back on the tools as not a leader, if you're so out of that space, suddenly you're like, ooh, can I actually go back to what I used to do, which is a bit scary to think about losing those skills, especially because the whole space changes so quickly. Another question. I have a feeling I know what the answer to this is going to be, but what can you do if your manager is just the worst leader and only cares about themselves? Yeah,
I'm not surprised to get this. So every time I've done this particular talk, I've had that same question posed. And yes, the answer to that is the way you need to try and demonstrate good leadership skills, even amongst poor leadership. Okay, and this is true for every aspect of life. I mean, we look at government, we look at all this stuff, and you're like, oh well, I've got the worst boss, and they just suck. That's not a really good attitude to be presenting and showing. So what I would suggest you do is, if you're not very happy with your boss or your manager or your design leader, be really proactive in helping them become better. And I don't mean by like telling someone that they suck at being a leader is not going to help them be better. So you need to be really tactful and really empathetic. I mean, I know we're supposed to be designers, we're supposed to be empathetic towards people. So the way that you can do it is just be proactive in saying, hey, so-and-so, say, for example, you really don't like the one-on-one catch-up structure that you have. You can come to them and say, hey, I saw this webinar the other day, and there's this new structure that I've seen, which I'd like to trial it. It goes like this. I think it would be better for us and more efficient. Like really spruik the benefits of whatever it is you would like to see change. Don't just come to them with a problem. Come with something that, hey, I'm not 100% happy with this, but I've seen this, and I think this might work better for both of us. And then see what the response is and just say, hey, what do you think? If you leave it real open, what do you think? Then it at least enables them to put their thoughts into it. They don't feel that they're being trapped or told what to do. And I think if you come in with that kind of empathy, you'll be amazed at what barriers you can sort of break down. And I know it's really hard, especially if you don't have a good relationship with your manager, but you also got to understand that they're just people like the rest of us. I mean, they put their pants on one leg at a time, like the rest of us. We're all the same. We all have, insecurities and fears and doubts and all that sort of stuff. So rather than like playing on that and exploiting that against them, you need to be like, well, how can I actually help them? If they're super stressed, just say, hey, how can I help you? Do you want me to take a bit of your load away? not too many managers would be like opposed to someone coming with a genuine attitude of, hey, I want to help. And then what you're doing is you're demonstrating leadership skills from the bottom up. And that's actually what you have to do. You can't think, oh, well, I'll start being a leader once I have lead on my title. You actually have to start from now, even and learning to be a good leader when your manager is not a good leader. That's the best environment you can be in to actually really learn and grow.
Thank you. Good question. Good answer. I might add a little. If someone is a massive dick, at some point you just have to look at leaving. Or or if you're that type of person, make a move, go around them and see what you can do. I mean, there are cases where you're just beating your head against a wall. In my opinion, that may be a bit of a strong opinion I'm bringing there. But anyway, we'll just move on.
Sorry, I didn't mention that, Eric, but no, you're spot on as well. You need to exhaust all avenues and try different things. But yeah, it might get to a point in time where you're just like, I'm not getting anywhere with this. And that's where you look for an exit and a new job. But yeah, spot on. I agree.
Yeah,
with that.
I think unless you do your due diligence and try everything and do it in good faith and be the bigger person in the room and try to forge a connection. And if you just say, they suck, and then you leave, you're never going to have that feeling of like, I did the right thing here. And you're never going to know whether you could have solved that situation, and it will maybe haunt you. I don't know. From Vivian Lee, I'm leading a team working on a project outside of our day jobs. I was wondering if you have any tips for leading a team in that more informal context. Really good question.
Look, all the same sorts of principles apply. I guess when you're leading people outside of the work environment, there's a few things that that are going to change in terms of obligation. So when you're leading people who you're not paying, they're not obligated to a paycheck. I'm assuming that's probably the case. So you've got a team of volunteers. You need to just change your approach and just make sure that it's like super open. You actually even need to be more empathetic, because if people are giving up their time outside of work hours, you need to be really considerate of people's time. So I would say the same sorts of principles apply. Maybe some of those systems might not be required, like, work visibility. But I think definitely things like the one-on-one catch-ups, that's actually probably even more important, because you need to be sussing out, hey, this thing that we're working on, it's in our spare time or in our own time, it's a passion project, whatever that is. We need to make sure that, is it still a passion project for you, or are you just struggling under the weight of everything else that's going on in your life right now? So I wouldn't, without knowing exactly what the project is, I would say similar principles apply. And if anything, building leadership capabilities within those people involved in that side hustle or that other project that you're working on, that's super important, because you want people to become their own leaders. So then that way you're not leading the team as in, well, nothing gets done unless I tell people what to do. That's not where you want to be. You want to be like, I'm really confident in their leadership abilities, and in the areas that they're not so good, I want to help equip them to be better leaders. So they're leading themselves, leading the project better. And I can just it just works like clockwork. That's the sweet spot where you really want to be. So yeah, that's what I suggest there.
Yeah, that's something I sort of deal with a lot as well, as cross-departmental projects. And for me, when they don't really have to be working on, it's like, make sure to keep that excitement, like have it be fun. And then also being very aware of people's time. I'm constantly asking, like, is this too much? Like, how much time do you think you can devote to this? I want you to, because as soon as they're like, it becomes work, it's not fun anymore. And then the passion goes away. And lots of projects of that type die because just people, it's not feasible to do it. There are lots more questions in the chat. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Cognizant of people's time on this session, as well as Matt's. Thank you so much. Really, really valuable. From all of the questions in the chat, it sounds like people really got a lot out of it. So we really appreciate your time. A few last thoughts from us. We have coaching programs for teams at Academy XI. So if that's something that your team within a business is interested in, send us an email. We can have a chat. We'll be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with sort of a recap of this presentation. We'll maybe try and answer some of the questions in the Q&A. We'll just have to check how many of them are I'm aware of Matt's time as well, but there's some really good ones in there. Thank you guys so much for firing them in. And yeah, best of luck on your leadership journey. Any last words, Matt?
No, thanks very much, everyone. If you also want to reach out on LinkedIn with any questions directly, feel free to add me on LinkedIn and do that. But no, this has been really good, and really excited to see and hear about your own personal leadership experiences off the back of this, and how you've applied some of this stuff, or your own experiences as well. Really, really excited to see what we can do here in Australia.
Great. Okay, thanks guys, and thanks Matt, and have a great rest of your day.
Cool. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.